Welcome back to my YouTube channel. In 1983, the United States was caught in the grip of transition. Economic uncertainty lingered in the air following the recession of the early 80s. The Reagan administration was steering the country through a shifting landscape, and change rippled through every layer of American society, including its coinage. The quarter dollar, long a staple of commerce and vending machines, underwent a subtle yet critical transformation that year. At a glance, the 1983 U.S. quarter seemed like any other, a copper nickel-clad coin bearing the familiar visage of George Washington on the obverse, and the iconic heraldic eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch on the reverse. Yet beneath this familiar facade, a mechanical anomaly quietly crept into circulation, unnoticed by most. The Philadelphia and Denver mints struck millions that year, and with them, buried within the tide of ordinary change, came a secret only a few sharp-eyed individuals would ever notice. Among these individuals was a soft-spoken collector from the outskirts of Nebraska named Harold Dinsby. Not a professional numismatist by any means, Harold's coin collection was modest, housed in cardboard folders tucked into a battered cedar chest. He didn't seek fame or fortune, just the quiet satisfaction of discovery. One chilly March evening in 1998, while sorting through a jar of loose change in his garage, Harold paused over a quarter that didn't quite feel right. There was no flash of inspiration or grand epiphany. It was something more subtle, a texture, a dullness, a sense that the coin resisted the light rather than reflecting it. He turned the quarter over. 1983, Philadelphia Mint. Nothing remarkable on first inspection. But as he rubbed his thumb across the reverse, he noticed the details felt shallow. Worn, yes, but not in the typical, smoothed-down fashion of circulation wear. It was almost as if the eagle itself was retreating into the coin, as though someone had softly erased its outline with an artist's thumb. Confused, Harold pulled out his magnifying loupe. That's when he saw it, the faint traces of weakness, the unusual striations, and what appeared to be incomplete strike marks across the surface. He reached for a known 1982 quarter and held it side by side. The contrast was shocking. The older coin gleamed, its details sharp and proud, while the 1983 piece looked ghost-like. It wasn't just worn, it was oddly formed. A chill settled over him. He flipped through his folders, pulled out references, scanned what few online coin boards existed in the dial-up era. The consensus among the few who had encountered similar coins was tentative but persistent. There was something off about some 1983 quarters, something tied to the minting process that year. A theory began to crystallize. The United States Mint, in an effort to cut costs during a time of economic tightening, had opted not to produce mint sets in 1983. That year's coins had no special, preserved versions, no brilliant uncirculated specimens carefully sealed in plastic. Every 1983 quarter had entered circulation. Every coin bore the brutal marks of cash registers, vending machines, pocket lint, and pavement. And that meant that any minting mistake or mechanical flaw had to be discovered by chance, by someone like Harold. The deeper he delved, the more he uncovered. Others had noticed similar defects, struck through grease errors, weak dies, off-center strikes, and missing detail in the lettering or the eagle's feathers. But the most compelling variation was something numismatists would come to call the 1983 P quarter with double rim and weak reverse. A strange hybrid of pressing error and die degradation, this variation featured a sharply doubled rim on one side and a barely there reverse, as though the metal had simply refused to yield to the die's pressure. It wasn't a one-off. It was a subtle pattern emerging across a rare subset of the 1983 Philadelphia run. Harold sent his coin off for grading, nervously, like a father sending his child off to school for the first time. Weeks passed. When it returned, he barely breathed as he opened the envelope. There, inside the slab, was his quarter. It bore the familiar gray luster, its weak strike clearer now under the plastic lens. But what truly stunned him was the label. 1983 P quarter, struck through grease, weak reverse, MS62. The grading was modest, but the designation confirmed it. His hunch had been right. Word began to spread slowly. Auction houses started to whisper about the 1983 P-era quarters. Dealers leaned forward when the date was mentioned. What had once been a forgettable year for coinage was stirring to life, thanks to anomalies like Harold's. Early sales were modest, $50, then $100. But as online collecting boomed in the early 2000s, a bidding war erupted. Each verified error drew attention. MS-64 examples went for hundreds, then thousands. Coin forums lit up with speculation. How many existed? Had they all been discovered? Were there pristine versions hiding in jars or desk drawers? Prices surged. A crisp 1983 P error in MS-65 fetched over $1,000 at auction, then $2,300. As the market turned speculative, dealers began offering bounties, paying in advance for the right to first refusal on newly discovered specimens. Some collectors hunted rolls from banks, hoping to catch lightning in a bottle. Others scrutinized every quarter they received in change, holding their breath before releasing it back into the world. The coin's journey from pocket change to precious artifact was nearly complete, and then came the twist. In 2017, during a late-night online auction, a new type of 1983 quarter emerged, not just an error, but a combination of defects never seen before. The listing described a 1983 P quarter, double rim, off-center strike, partial collar, weak reverse die clash. The photos were almost surreal. The coin looked melted along one edge, like it had oozed sideways under pressure. The reverse was nearly blank, save for a ghostly outline of the eagle's wing, while the obverse showed a faint mirror image of the reverse design, a phenomenon known as die clash, when improperly prepared dies strike each other without a coin between them, imprinting their images onto one another. The bidding began at $200. By midnight, it hit $5,000. When the dust settled, the final price stood at $14,400. Collectors were stunned. This was no longer just a minting quirk. It was an art piece born from chaos, a fusion of mechanical mishap and metallurgical poetry. Experts debated its origin. Some claimed the mint had experienced severe mechanical issues that year, especially at the Philadelphia facility. Others whispered about undertrained operators, fatigued machinery, and rushed deadlines. Whatever the cause, the coin stood alone, part mistake, part masterpiece. But one final revelation still lay ahead. In 2021, a retired mint employee came forward anonymously through a numismatic podcast. His voice, digitally disguised, recounted working the night shift during the spring of 1983. He described the tension, the faulty presses, the grease-clawed dies, and the orders from higher-ups to keep the lines moving no matter what. "We knew," he said. "We knew something wasn't right. Some of us even joked that we were minting ghosts." He didn't recall how many coins were affected. Maybe hundreds. Maybe thousands. But the implication was clear. The errors were no accident. They were a symptom of systemic strain, a byproduct of haste. Collectors latched onto the story. The mythology of the 1983 P quarter swelled. It wasn't just a flawed coin. It was a historical echo, a metal whisper of bureaucratic shortcuts and silent dissent. Every coin now carried a question. Was this one of the ghosts the worker had spoken of? Harold, now older and more reflective, watched as his once humble discovery gained mythical status. He no longer sold his coins. He kept them, lined up in a felt-lined box, each labeled by hand. When young collectors asked him how to find such a coin, he'd only smile and say, "You've got to feel for it. They're not loud coins. They hide in plain sight. But if you listen, they'll tell you their story." Today, the 1983 P quarter error is a legend. Not because of its metal or design, but because of its voice. It speaks of pressure, both mechanical and human, of imperfections born not from negligence, but from endurance. It's a reminder that even in the cold precision of minting, History leaves fingerprints. And sometimes, in the quietest corners of our pockets, treasures wait to be heard. In the year 2001, the American landscape was swept up in a patriotic fervor that echoed from coast to coast. The world was changing, and the United States, unknowingly on the cusp of a seismic shift, was also halfway through one of the most ambitious coin programs in its history. The 50-state quarters program, launched in 1999, had captivated collectors and the general public alike. Each year, 5 states were honored with uniquely designed quarters that celebrated their history, heritage, and landmarks. And in 2001, 5 more states took their place in metal: New York, North Carolina, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Kentucky. Millions of these coins rolled off the presses in Philadelphia and Denver, circulating swiftly into the hands of Americans eager to complete their collections. Most of the coins gleamed with uniform precision, products of modern minting at its peak. But amid the torrent of nickel-plated copper that passed through banks, cash drawers, and vending machines, a handful of coins carried a silent flaw. One coin, in particular, born under the Denver Mint mark, bore a quiet error that would take years to understand. It would be almost a decade later before the mistake would fully reveal itself. Tucked away in the Pacific Northwest, a retired machinist named Eldon Brooks spent his evenings examining pocket change under a fluorescent lamp in his cluttered basement. A lifelong tinkerer, Eldon didn't consider himself a serious numismatist. His fascination came from the mechanics. He admired how coins were struck, how pressure and precision turned metal blanks into miniature works of art. To him, a coin was a machine signature, and mistakes were like fingerprints left behind. On an overcast Thursday, as rain tapped against his workshop window, Eldon spotted something unusual. He'd just returned from the post office with a handful of change. As he lined the coins along the edge of his bench, one quarter caught the light strangely. It was a Kentucky State quarter, dated 2001, with a clean D mint mark. The obverse, with Washington's profile, seemed oddly thick around the rim. Eldon squinted. The letters appeared compressed, uneven. The reverse, the faint image of Federal Hill and the galloping racehorse, looked blurred at the edges, like someone had dragged a finger across the die during minting. His fingers tingled slightly as he picked it up. He flipped it back and forth. There was something unmistakably wrong with this strike. He pulled out his caliper and took quick measurements. The thickness was just a hair over what it should be. He waited. The scale flickered, hesitated, and then gave a reading heavier than normal. That didn't make sense. Quarters struck on foreign planchets or blank planchets tended to weigh less, not more. He dropped it under his microscope. And that's when he saw it. A faint, barely perceptible second image, Washington's profile, shadowed along the obverse, tilted slightly, as if the die had danced across the surface. A double die? No, not quite. It wasn't a true doubling. It was more chaotic than that. The lettering, especially the word Liberty, looked stretched, as if pulled taut before snapping back. It had all the signs of a dramatic die rotation or a misaligned strike, possibly even a clash or blockage, but there was no textbook definition that quite fit. Curious, he posted images to a coin forum under a pseudonym. Most users dismissed it as post-mint damage, maybe a vice job, someone manipulating it outside the mint. But a few eagle-eyed collectors disagreed. They pointed to the reverse die alignment, the evidence of overpressure, and the trace signs of a rotated die. Eldon's coin didn't just feature a generic error, it seemed to be the product of a rare convergence of mechanical failures. A misaligned die strike combined with a partial collar and what appeared to be hub doubling. Months passed. He sent the coin for grading, more to satisfy his curiosity than in hope of a windfall. When it returned, encased in its plastic slab, the label read, 2001 D Kentucky quarter, major die rotation with hub doubling, AU 58. Eldon stared at it, stunned. He had read about rotated dies, even mild hub doublings, but the combination of the two, on a single coin, from a high-mintage state quarter run was unprecedented. Word spread. A few more examples began surfacing in different states. A coin dealer in Michigan claimed to have found a similar 2001D Kentucky quarter with a 100-degree die rotation. Another appeared at a flea market in Florida, showing the same distortion along the rim and faint doubling on the obverse. But they were scarce. For every 1,000 2001 quarters examined, only a handful showed the anomaly. Some collectors began referring to it as the ghost horse quarter, thanks to the smudged silhouette of the stallion on the reverse in extreme examples. At first, values fluctuated wildly. One sold online for $75. Another fetched $400 at a regional auction. A mint state version reportedly went for over $100. But as coin grading services began cataloging the error as a verified variation, prices surged. Heritage Auctions listed a rare MS-65 specimen in 2019, and it climbed to $750 before the gavel dropped. The same year, Eldon's coin was quietly sold to a private collector for an undisclosed amount, but rumors swirled that the sale had topped $3,000. Collectors hunted through rolls from the bank. Dealers placed wanted ads in numismatic journals. Still, the ghost horse remained elusive. What made the coin so valuable wasn't just the error itself, but the fact that it emerged during a time when minting technology was at its peak. By 2001, the U.S. Mint had ironed out most quality control issues. Errors of this magnitude weren't supposed to happen anymore. Which raised the question, how did this one slip through? A breakthrough came in 2020, when a Freedom of Information Act request unearthed internal Mint documentation related to a series of press failures at the Denver Mint in early 2001. Buried in the report was a reference to die assembly C12, Kentucky reverse, exhibiting severe lateral motion due to torque backlash in strike phase. In plain language, the Mint had acknowledged a mechanical flaw that caused the die to twist mid-strike, producing rotational anomalies. The real twist came when it was discovered that the flawed die had been used not just for Kentucky quarters, but briefly for Vermont and Rhode Island as well. A numismatist in Maine unearthed a 2001D Vermont quarter with nearly identical rotation issues. A dealer in California found a Rhode Island quarter with a misaligned collar and distorted rigging lines on the ship. It seemed the Mint had quietly pulled the faulty die after a few weeks, retooling without acknowledging the defect publicly. Now, the scope of the error widened. What had begun as a curiosity on one Kentucky quarter had transformed into a mini-series of unintentional variations spread across 3 of the year's 5 state quarters. But only the Kentucky version showed all 3 defects simultaneously: die rotation, hub doubling, and partial collar distortion, making it the centerpiece of the anomaly. The trifecta. Coin shows began listing it under glass as the 2001 trifecta error. Collectors debated its future. Would values keep climbing? Was there a hidden cache of these quarters still undiscovered? Or had the brief error window produced fewer than 100 viable examples? In 2022, a sealed mint bag labeled 2001D Kentucky 40 quarters was found in the estate of a former Denver Mint employee. It was pristine, untouched. The bag was auctioned with no guarantee of error coins inside. Still, bids climbed past $10,000. When opened under careful supervision, 2 error coins were pulled from the lot. One of them, near mint state, bore the full trio of defects and later graded MS-66, becoming the highest graded known specimen. That coin, later dubbed Eldon's Legacy in numismatic circles, sold at public auction for a staggering $12 for 100. Today, the 2001D Kentucky quarter error lives on not only in price guides and collectors' displays, but in whispers among enthusiasts who still sort through their spare change in search of the next great anomaly. It stands as proof that even in the most structured systems, flaws can manifest in beautiful, valuable, and inexplicable ways. For Eldon, who never sought profit or prestige, the coin was a reminder that sometimes machines leave behind secrets. And for the rest of the numismatic world, it remains a testament to how a simple slip in the minting process can echo through decades, etched in copper and nickel, and wrapped in mystery. In 2005, the U.S. Mint released another coin in its widely celebrated 50-state quarters program, this time honoring the rugged beauty and heartland pride of Kansas. The design was simple yet bold. A majestic American bison stood prominently on the reverse, with a sunflower, the Kansas state flower, positioned nearby. The words, "Kansas 1861," served as a proud tribute to the year the state entered the Union. It was one of 5 designs issued that year, all part of a campaign to educate, commemorate, and collect. Millions of these quarters flowed out of the Denver and Philadelphia mints, destined for circulation and daily use. No one suspected that within this ordinary batch, an unintentional flaw would set a handful of coins apart forever. On an afternoon much like any other, a coin collector in the Midwest was sorting through a roll of quarters from his local bank. He had no grand expectations, just the usual routine, examining mint marks, scanning for oddities. As he thumbed through the Kansas quarters, he noticed something strange. He held one under the light, rotating it slowly. The phrase, "In God we trust," didn't look quite right. There was something missing, something important. The T in trust wasn't fully there. In fact, it looked like it had vanished. The coin in his hand read, "In God we rust." He stared at it in disbelief, turning it over again and again, expecting to find damage. A scratch? A chemical blemish? But the surface was smooth. The absence of the letter wasn't caused by wear or abuse. It had never been there in the first place. What he was looking at wasn't damage. It was a mistake from the mint itself. A mint error, untouched by post-production tampering. As his pulse quickened, he began to research. He wasn't the only one. Across the country, a quiet buzz had already begun. Other collectors were reporting similar finds, Kansas quarters missing the same letter. The error was caused by a phenomenon known to seasoned numismatists as a grease-filled die. During production, excess grease or debris had clogged the die, preventing the metal from striking the full detail of certain letters. These grease-filled dies can impact any part of a coin, but when they strike at a motto as iconic as, "In God we trust," the results are startling and oddly comical. It was a rare occurrence, but not entirely unique. Still, what made this particular instance so compelling was the unintended message. It was as if the coin had whispered a different philosophy entirely. "In God we rust." It sparked curiosity, laughter, even philosophical musings. And just like that, a mundane piece of change became an artifact of curiosity. More collectors joined the hunt. Forums filled with photos and discussion. People began buying Kansas quarter rolls, searching for the flaw. The majority, of course, turned up ordinary. But every so often, one would surface, a faint T, or none at all. Some even showed partial strikes, where the vertical line of the T was barely visible, like a ghost of the letter. The excitement grew. Dealers started paying attention. At first, the error coins were fetching modest prices, $10, maybe $15. But as demand rose and more people joined the chase, prices began to climb. Some were content to find one just to keep. Others saw them as investments, pieces of modern minting history. The more complete the error, the more completely missing the T, the more valuable the coin became. Soon, the story took another turn. A different collector, after examining dozens of Kansas quarters, discovered a second error. This one was harder to notice at first glance. On the back, near the bison's shoulder, a faint crack stretched from the animal's mouth outward. Under magnification, it resembled a fine line of drool. The numismatic community began calling it the "spitting bison" error. Though entirely unrelated to the missing T, it further cemented 2005 Kansas quarters as a hotbed of collectible oddities. And then came the humpback bison variant, a die break that left the bison's back looking unnaturally elevated, almost like it was carrying a hidden burden. These variations were few, but enough to stir deeper intrigue. People weren't just collecting a single error, they were cataloging a family of unusual traits tied to one coin. What started as a simple grease error turned into a coin with personality. And with that personality came value. The market responded in kind. At coin shows Kansas quarters with the "In God We Rust" error started showing up in plastic holders, graded and authenticated by third-party services. Grading mattered. Circulated coins with a strong error might sell for $20 to $30, while uncirculated examples in pristine condition began reaching the $75 range. Those with more dramatic omissions, where the T was completely gone and the rest of the coin remained sharp, climbed higher still. The most fascinating twist came when a small number of hybrid errors were discovered. These were Kansas quarters not only missing the T in trust, but also showing grease strikes in the word, liberty, or even weakening in the date. These were anomalies within anomalies, coins that defied the odds twice. Their market value surged, with collectors battling to own the rarest of the rare. And yet, not all errors were equally received. As more examples emerged, grading companies had to clarify what constituted a legitimate version of the error. Light grease fills or slightly faded letters weren't always enough. The boldest omissions, especially those verified to be from minting rather than post-mint damage, remained the most sought after. Time passed, but the Kansas quarter refused to fade from memory. It became a fixture in modern error coin collections, a reminder that even in a controlled, industrial process like coin production, human oversight and mechanical quirks can produce something unexpected. And in that unexpected space lies opportunity. Collectors continue to cherish the coin, not just for its numismatic value, but for the humor and curiosity it inspires. It bridges the gap between history, accident, and art. People still check their Kansas quarters. Dealers still get asked about it. And every so often, someone finds one in a drawer, long forgotten, and wonders why the national motto looks just a little bit off. Today, the value of the 2005 Kansas "In God We Rust" quarter varies depending on condition and clarity of the error. Circulated examples with a partially missing T often sell for $15 to $30. Coins where the T is entirely gone and the rest of the coin remains in sharp, uncirculated condition can fetch $75 to $100. And those rare specimens with additional strike-throughs or hybrid errors, such as faded letters in multiple parts of the design, have been known to sell privately and at auction for over $300.